welcome in. We start at the White House, where Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy met with President Trump this afternoon. Zelenskyy left the White House moments ago, so you can see a car that's going to be taking off. It is his third visit to the White House since the start of Trump's second term. Now, let's go to the meeting room, the cabinet room actually showing the focus defense weapons. There you go, as Ukraine is now 3 years into its war with Russia with no sign of de-escalation. Zelenskyy is pushing the White House for more advanced weapons like long-range Tomahawk missiles. A notable moment during this meeting is President Zelenskyy proposing a swap with the U.S., drones for Tomahawk missiles.
Ukraine has such thousands of our production drones, but we don't have Tomahawks. That's why we need Tomahawks. But the United States is a very strong production, and the United States has Tomahawks and other missiles, very strong missiles, but they can have our thousands of drones.
CBS News White House reporter Willie James Inman is live from West Palm Beach. So, Willie James, will a swap be happening, and what else came of this meeting?
Hey there, Jules. Good to be with you from West Palm Beach, Florida, where the president will spend the weekend at his Florida home. This is a wait-and-see moment in terms of a potential arms deal that seemed to be taking place in real time there in that meeting. Certainly, President Zelenskyy wanting those Tomahawk missiles in large part because they could help Ukraine in its fight against Russia. Ukraine would be able to attack deep into Russian territory. Of course, the Russians would view that as an escalation, but that is certainly part of the discussion that happened there in that room, whether or not the U.S. would get behind being able to allow Ukraine to not only use those missiles, but also get their hands on them. Now, the president mentioned that the U.S. has advanced weapons of its own, including fighter jets. He also said that the U.S. needs those Tomahawk missiles to defend itself. So that's the big topic of conversation on the table. On top of that, the president was asked about whether or not essentially he was being played by Russian President Vladimir Putin, whether or not Putin was trying to buy more time. And the president said that it was possible, but he also noted that both Putin and Zelenskyy seem to want to make a deal to end this war. Now, of course, Zelenskyy in the room basically said that that is not Putin's intention. But of course, remember, the president spoke with the Russian leader just yesterday on the phone for about 2.5 hours, where part of that conversation focused on not only the conflict in Ukraine, but a meeting that will be set up between, for now at least, between the Russian president and President Trump in Hungary in the days to come, Jules.
Yeah, let's talk about the timing of these things. We know that Trump has a meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Hungary. That's coming up. So will today's meeting potentially impact Putin's willingness to negotiate?
Well, look, on the table here is the concerns for Zelenskyy, and he mentioned as much. He said that he was looking to get security guarantees. So we, of course, know that Putin and Trump had that meeting in Alaska, the Alaska summit. It didn't really get these two warring nations to the table. It didn't get a Putin-Zelenskyy summit. Those are the two leaders that you really need to have in the room to talk this war and talk about ending this war, to talk together and talk through that. Certainly, Zelenskyy being able to attempt to get President Trump to his side could certainly draw some concerns from the Russians, especially when it comes to those Tomahawk missiles, those long-range missiles that the U.S., if it agrees, would be able to give them. It would certainly help with that conflict. So it's anyone's guess in terms of what is in Putin's head. But today, the clear focus for the president of Ukraine is to get President Trump on his side, to get that continued support from the U.S. and to try to put pressure on the Russians to bring President Putin to the table of peace. And President Trump seemingly playing mediator in this instance, working to bring both leaders together, speaking to both leaders and saying that the Middle East conflict that he was able to help solve, help to bring a resolution there, that this could be some momentum going in from that situation to this situation, this conflict that has really bedeviled his presidency since he took office for his second term earlier this year, Jules.
Willie James Inman. Willie James, thanks so much. All right, let's talk about those Tomahawk missiles. They were were first used in Operation Desert Storm back in 1991. They have a reach of more than 1,000 miles. They're 20 feet long and weigh 3,000 pounds each. CBS News chief foreign affairs correspondent and Face the Nation host Margaret Brennan explains how those missiles could reshape the landscape of the war for Ukraine.
President Zelenskyy has said himself that longer range capabilities are his focus. So whether it's Tomahawks or other weaponry, and by the way, don't forget the importance of U.S. intelligence sharing in order to make that weaponry more effective, that's his laundry list, including increasing just basic systems within the F-16 fighters U.S. already provided.